February 24, 1991. Al-Basra Airfield, southern Iraq. An Iraqi Republican Guard artillery battalion occupies defensive positions around the airfield perimeter. The battalion commander, Colonel Rashid al-Tikriti, feels confident in his preparations. His forces have dug reinforced positions, dispersed artillery pieces to complicate counter-battery fire, and established observation posts that provide comprehensive coverage of approaches to the airfield. His gunners possess extensive combat experience from 8 years of war against Iran. They know artillery combat, understand counter-battery procedures, and operate Soviet-supplied equipment that performed adequately throughout the Iran-Iraq War. Coalition ground operations began hours earlier, and Rashid expects his artillery will engage American forces as they advance toward Iraqi positions. At 0400 hours, Rashid's radar warning system activates. Incoming fire detected. Range and bearing calculations appear on displays. The targeting data seems wrong. The incoming fire originates from positions more than 30 kilometers distant, beyond effective range for most artillery systems. Rashid orders his counter-battery units to prepare response fire, but before they can calculate firing solutions, the world explodes. 12 American M270 multiple launch rocket systems, positioned 32 kilometers south of the airfield, have launched a coordinated salvo. 144 rockets arc through the pre-dawn darkness. Each rocket releases its payload of submunitions at predetermined altitude above the target area. 7,744 individual submunitions fall across the airfield in a pattern that covers the entire defended area. The bombardment lasts approximately 60 seconds from first impact to final detonation. The sound blends into continuous roar as individual submunitions detonate across every meter of the airfield complex. Rashid's command post takes direct impacts. His communication systems cease functioning. His observation posts stop reporting. Across the airfield, Iraqi artillery pieces sit disabled, their crews unable to continue operations. The few Iraqi soldiers who survived the engagement, uninjured, report later that the sky appeared to turn to fire, that they couldn't distinguish individual detonations because the explosions formed continuous thunder, that their defensive positions provided no protection against submunitions that fell from above, rather than arriving in ballistic trajectories they had trained to defend against. Rashid attempts to execute counter-battery procedures. His remaining functional artillery pieces orient toward the suspected American positions and prepare to engage. 8 minutes have elapsed since the American rockets impacted. Iraqi guns fire toward where American MLRS vehicles had been positioned. The shells impact empty desert. The American MLRS vehicles executed shoot and scoot procedures, displacing more than 15 kilometers from their firing positions before Iraqi counter-battery response began. Iraqi artillery doctrine, developed through decades of Soviet training and refined through years of combat experience, proves completely inadequate against American systems that engage from beyond Iraqi effective range and displace before Iraqi forces can respond. Al-Basra Airfield has been rendered non-operational as a military facility within 2 minutes of engagement. This is not the artillery war Iraq prepared to fight. Iraqi confidence in their artillery forces reflected genuine capability developed through extensive combat experience and Soviet equipment that had proven adequate against Iranian forces. Iraqi artillery doctrine during the 1980s followed Soviet operational principles, emphasizing mass tube artillery organized in large formations that could concentrate fire on priority targets. The Iran-Iraq War provided Iraqi artillery units with substantial combat experience. Iraqi gunners learned to coordinate fire missions, conduct counter-battery operations, provide fire support for advancing infantry and armor, and execute defensive artillery planning that disrupted Iranian offensive operations. Iraqi equipment included Soviet-supplied systems that represented capable artillery by international standards. The 2S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzer mounted a 120 mm gun on a tracked chassis, providing mobile fire support with reasonable accuracy out to 15 kilometers. D-30 howitzers, towed 122 mm guns, served as standard divisional artillery throughout Iraqi forces. The BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher provided area fire capability, launching 40 122mm rockets to ranges approaching 20 kilometers. These systems, properly employed by trained crews, created effective artillery forces that had performed adequately throughout the Iran-Iraq War. Republican Guard artillery units represented Iraq's best-trained and best-equipped forces. These units received priority for ammunition, maintained their equipment better than regular army formations, and trained more extensively in sophisticated fire support procedures. Republican Guard artillery commanders believed their forces could suppress coalition artillery through volume of fire, even if coalition systems possessed technological advantages. Iraqi doctrine held that proper employment of available forces would compensate for any equipment disparities. Quantity could overcome quality through proper tactics and aggressive employment. Iraqi defensive preparations reflected Soviet artillery doctrine adapted to Iraqi circumstances. Artillery positions were hardened with reinforced bunkers, protective berms, and overhead cover against counter-battery fire. Units dispersed across wide areas to complicate enemy targeting, with individual guns separated by hundreds of meters to prevent single attacks from neutralizing multiple pieces. Ammunition stockpiles were distributed across multiple locations to ensure continued operations if some supply points were engaged. These preparations represented sound artillery practice that should have provided reasonable survivability against conventional counter-battery operations. Iraqi assessments of American artillery reflected intelligence analysis that proved systematically wrong. Iraqi military intelligence reported that American artillery employed similar systems to Iraqi forces, that American guns had somewhat longer range and better accuracy, but no fundamental capability advantages. Intelligence officers assured field commanders that American artillery could be engaged effectively using standard Soviet counter-battery procedures. Iraqi forces expected artillery duels, where both sides exchanged fire at similar ranges, where Iraqi numerical advantages and crew experience would prove decisive factors. These assessments completely missed the revolutionary capability that American MLRS represented. The M270 multiple launch rocket system emerged from US Army requirements established in the 1970s for a highly mobile, long-range, rapid-fire artillery system capable of delivering overwhelming firepower against Soviet forces in European scenarios. The Army needed capability to engage multiple targets across wide areas simultaneously, to deliver fire faster than enemy forces could take cover, and to displace immediately after firing to avoid counter-battery response. These requirements drove development of a system unlike any previous artillery weapon. Vought Corporation won the development contract and began M270 production in the early 1980s. The system employed a tracked chassis derived from the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle, providing mobility that matched mechanized infantry and armor formations. The tracked platform could traverse rough terrain, maintain pace with advancing forces, and provide stable firing platform even on unimproved surfaces. The chassis mounted a hydraulically operated launch pod containing 12 227mm rockets arranged in two 6-rocket packs. The entire system displaced approximately 25 tons combat loaded, light enough for strategic airlift, yet heavy enough for cross-country mobility. The M26 rocket represented sophisticated munition design optimized for area fire missions. Each rocket measured approximately 13 feet long and weighed approximately 600 pounds at launch. A solid propellant rocket motor provided thrust for approximately 5 seconds, accelerating the rocket to supersonic speed and propelling it along a ballistic trajectory toward the target area. The rocket employed inertial guidance with terminal corrections that improved accuracy compared to unguided rockets. Maximum range exceeded 32 kilometers, substantially farther than most tube artillery could engage effectively. The M26's payload consisted of 644 M77 dual-purpose, improved conventional munitions. Each submunition measured approximately 2 inches in diameter and contained both shape charge and fragmentation effects. The shape charge component could penetrate light armor and vehicle hulls. The fragmentation component created effective radius against personnel and unarmored equipment. At predetermined altitude above the target, calculated by onboard timer, the rocket's warhead section separated, and spin-stabilized dispensers released the submunitions across the target area in a pattern that provided uniform coverage. A single M26 rocket covered approximately 0.23 square kilometers with submunitions, roughly equivalent to the area of 3 American football fields. The coverage pattern ensured that targets throughout the affected area faced multiple submunition impacts. Anything caught in the pattern, whether armored vehicles, trucks, personnel, or equipment, sustained damage from multiple submunitions. The system's effectiveness reflected not just the individual submunitions, but the density of coverage that made evasion impossible. A full 12 rocket salvo from one M270 vehicle released 7,728 submunitions, covering approximately 2.8 square kilometers in less than 60 seconds. The psychological impact of this rapid-fire capability equaled its physical effectiveness. Enemy forces had no time to take cover, no opportunity to maneuver away from the impact area, no effective response except to hope they weren't in the target zone. The combination of range, speed, and coverage density created artillery capability that exceeded anything Soviet doctrine had prepared Iraqi forces to counter. Reload procedures reflected American emphasis on sustained operations tempo. A trained 3-person crew could reload the launch pod in approximately 5 minutes using a specialized handling vehicle that carried additional rocket packs. This reload capability allowed MLRS vehicles to conduct multiple fire missions during sustained operations, maintaining pressure on enemy forces across extended periods. The rapid reload time, combined with the system's mobility, meant that MLRS vehicles could fire, displace, reload, move to new firing positions, and engage again before enemy forces completed response to the initial engagement. Fire control systems incorporated digital technology that revolutionized artillery operations. The M270 employed computerized fire control that calculated firing solutions automatically based on target coordinates, meteorological data, and vehicle position information. GPS positioning, accurate to within meters, eliminated errors from manual position plotting. Digital communications enabled rapid target data transmission from forward observers or intelligence sources directly to firing units. The time from target identification to rounds impacting could be measured in minutes rather than the hours traditional artillery procedures required. Shoot and scoot doctrine maximized MLRS survivability by emphasizing immediate displacement after firing. Standard procedures called for MLRS vehicles to occupy firing positions, launch their salvos, and displace within 5 minutes. This rapid sequence prevented enemy counter-battery fire from engaging MLRS positions, because by the time enemy forces calculated firing solutions and delivered counter-battery fire, the MLRS vehicles had moved kilometers away from their firing positions. Soviet counter-battery doctrine assumed artillery remained relatively static during engagements, allowing calculated response fire. MLRS mobility defeated these assumptions completely. Crew training emphasized technical proficiency and tactical employment. Each M270 required 3 crew members, a driver, a gunner, and a section chief. The driver operated the tracked vehicle, navigating terrain and executing displacement orders. The gunner operated the fire control system, inputting targeting data and executing launch sequences. The section chief commanded the vehicle, coordinated with higher headquarters, and managed tactical operations. All 3 crew members trained extensively on simulators before deploying to Desert Storm, ensuring proficiency in procedures they would execute under combat conditions. Desert Storm deployment included 189 M270 vehicles, organized into 9 battalions distributed across 7th Corps and 17th Airborne Corps. Each battalion contained multiple batteries of MLRS vehicles supported by ammunition supply vehicles, maintenance sections, and command elements. The battalions integrated into division artillery organizations, providing corps and division commanders with fire support capability that substantially exceeded traditional tube artillery. The MLRS deployment represented the system's first large-scale combat employment, an opportunity to validate capabilities that had been developed over the previous decade. Coalition ground operations commenced on February 24, 1991, following 38 days of air operations that had degraded Iraqi forces substantially but left significant Iraqi ground capabilities intact. MLRS vehicles deployed along the front provided immediate fire support as coalition forces advanced into Iraqi-held territory. The opening barrage on February 24th included more than 6,000 MLRS rockets expended in the first 24 hours of ground operations, an expenditure rate that exceeded anything Iraqi forces could match or respond to effectively. Target priorities reflected MLRS capabilities in area fire missions. Iraqi artillery positions received priority targeting because neutralizing Iraqi indirect fire capability protected advancing coalition forces from the most serious threat Iraqi forces posed. Command posts represented high-value targets because disrupting Iraqi command and control degraded coordination across entire formations. Assembly areas where Iraqi forces concentrated for defensive operations or counterattacks received MLRS engagement to prevent Iraqi forces from massing effectively. Airfields that might support Iraqi air operations or logistics received coverage that rendered them non-operational. Supply depots that sustained Iraqi defensive operations received engagement that disrupted Iraqi logistics sustainably. The Al-Basra airfield engagement illustrated MLRS effectiveness against fixed installations. 12 M270 vehicles, coordinated through digital fire control network, received targeting data, identifying Iraqi artillery positions and support facilities at the airfield. The MLRS crews calculated firing solutions accounting for range, wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. At precisely coordinated time, all 12 vehicles launched full salvos within seconds of each other. 144 rockets impacted the target area in pattern that covered every defended position around the airfield. Submunitions fell on artillery pieces, command facilities, ammunition storage areas, vehicle parks, and defensive positions simultaneously. Within 2 minutes of first rocket impact, Al-Basra airfield ceased functioning as operational military facility. Iraqi forces attempting to use the airfield for logistics or air operations found facilities disabled and positions unusable. Operations around Al-Khafji demonstrated MLRS effectiveness against mobile armored formations. When Iraqi mechanized forces attempted limited offensive operations into Saudi Arabia near Al-Khafji in late January 1991, MLRS provided fire support that complemented direct fire from coalition armor and air operations. Iraqi formations advancing toward coalition positions encountered MLRS fire that forced withdrawal without close combat occurring. Iraqi tank crews reported that MLRS submunitions damaged vehicles, disrupted formations, and created casualties that made continuing advances impossible. The psychological impact of MLRS fire under these circumstances proved as important as physical damage, as Iraqi commanders lost confidence in their ability to advance against an opponent who could engage their formations from positions they couldn't locate or return fire against. Republican Guard positions defending approaches to Basra received systematic MLRS engagement throughout the ground campaign. These positions, occupied by Iraq's most capable forces employing proper defensive tactics, should have provided significant resistance to coalition advances. Instead, MLRS fire rendered defensive positions untenable before coalition ground forces arrived. Survivors from Republican Guard units consistently reported that MLRS fire created conditions where organized defense became impossible. They couldn't distinguish individual submunition detonations because explosions occurred too rapidly and too densely. They couldn't identify safe areas because submunitions covered entire defensive zones uniformly. They couldn't maintain unit cohesion because communications broke down, and personnel became isolated in positions under continuous bombardment. Iraqi counter-battery attempts illustrated the futility of employing Soviet artillery doctrine against American MLRS capabilities. Iraqi artillery units, detecting incoming MLRS fire through radar or observation, attempted to execute standard counter-battery procedures. Iraqi fire direction centers calculated suspected American firing positions based on observed rocket trajectories. Iraqi guns oriented toward those positions and fired counter-battery missions. These missions consistently arrived 8 to 10 minutes after American MLRS salvos impacted Iraqi positions. By that time, American MLRS vehicles had displaced 15 kilometers or more from their firing positions, executing shoot-and-scoot procedures that rendered Iraqi counter-battery fire completely ineffective. Iraqi artillery crews fired thousands of rounds towards suspected MLRS positions without achieving any significant success against actual MLRS vehicles. Effectiveness assessments conducted through prisoner interrogations and post-conflict analysis confirmed MLRS impact on Iraqi forces. Iraqi prisoners, interviewed systematically about their combat experiences, consistently identified MLRS as the most feared coalition weapon system. Iraqi soldiers stated they preferred facing direct fire from coalition tanks or aircraft rather than experiencing MLRS bombardment. The explanation they provided illustrated the psychological dimension of MLRS effectiveness. Against tanks or aircraft, Iraqi soldiers felt they could take cover, return fire, attempt tactical responses. Against MLRS, they felt helpless, unable to protect themselves or respond effectively. The combination of range, speed, and coverage density created a sense of vulnerability that degraded combat effectiveness beyond simple physical casualties. Total MLRS expenditure during Desert Storm reached 10,770 rockets. This enormous consumption reflected both the system's effectiveness and American willingness to employ ammunition liberally when circumstances justified. Post-conflict analysis determined that few Iraqi units remained combat effective after receiving MLRS engagement. Units that sustained MLRS fire typically required reconstitution before they could perform military missions effectively, and many Iraqi formations simply disintegrated after experiencing MLRS bombardment. The reasons Iraqi artillery failed to counter MLRS reflected multiple interconnected capability gaps that Iraqi forces couldn't bridge through tactical adjustments. Range disparity created fundamental disadvantage Iraqi forces never overcame. MLRS engaged from ranges exceeding 32 kilometers, while Iraqi BM-21 Grad rockets, their closest equivalent system, reached maximum ranges around 20 kilometers. This 12-kilometer range advantage meant MLRS could engage Iraqi artillery without Iraqi forces possessing ability to return fire effectively. Iraqi artillery attempting to advance into range where they could engage MLRS positions exposed themselves to destruction from coalition direct fire systems and air operations. Technology gaps in fire control systems created temporal advantages that proved decisive. MLRS digital fire control calculated firing solutions in minutes, enabling engagement of time-sensitive targets before those targets could relocate or disperse. Iraqi manual fire direction procedures required substantially longer times from target identification to rounds impacting. By the time Iraqi artillery completed firing calculations, MLRS vehicles had already engaged their targets and displaced to new positions. The speed differential meant MLRS consistently achieved first-shot advantages, while Iraqi responses arrived after American systems had moved. Mobility differences created survivability disparities that compounded other advantages. MLRS shoot-and-scoot doctrine emphasized immediate displacement after firing, typically within 5 minutes. Iraqi artillery followed Soviet static positioning practices where artillery remained in prepared positions through extended periods. This doctrinal difference meant MLRS survived counter-battery attempts while Iraqi artillery remained vulnerable to systematic engagement by coalition counter-battery systems. The mobility advantage, combined with range and fire control superiority, created a situation where MLRS operated with near-complete survivability, while Iraqi artillery sustained continuous attrition. Area coverage comparisons illustrated the firepower disparity between systems. A single 12-rocket MLRS salvo delivered 7,728 submunitions, covering approximately 3 square kilometers. Achieving equivalent coverage with Iraqi BM-21 Grad systems would require approximately 33 complete 40-rocket salvos, representing 1,320 individual rockets. The disparity meant that one American MLRS vehicle could deliver area fire roughly equivalent to an entire Iraqi rocket artillery battalion and deliver it faster while operating from greater range with superior survivability. Training differences affected system employment effectiveness substantially. American MLRS crews received extensive training on simulators that replicated combat conditions, practiced procedures until performance became automatic, and deployed to Desert Storm with confidence in their systems and their abilities. Iraqi artillery crews received more limited training, conducted less live fire practice due to ammunition costs, and operated systems they understood less thoroughly. The training gap meant American crews employed their systems near maximum theoretical effectiveness, while Iraqi crews operated significantly below potential capability. The strategic impact of MLRS effectiveness during Desert Storm influenced artillery development worldwide. The demonstration that long-range, rapid-fire area coverage systems could dominate conventional artillery created recognition that traditional tube artillery required either modernization or complementing with systems possessing MLRS-like capabilities. The success validated American investment in fire support technologies and influenced defense spending priorities globally. Iraqi perspectives on MLRS, revealed through prisoner accounts and post-war interviews, illustrated psychological impact that exceeded physical damage. Iraqi soldiers who survived MLRS engagements considered the system essentially invincible, believing that no effective defense or counter existed. This perception, whether accurate or not, degraded Iraqi combat effectiveness by creating sense of helplessness when facing coalition forces. Iraqi commanders attempting to maintain unit cohesion struggled against demoralization created by MLRS encounters where their forces sustained substantial casualties without ability to identify enemy positions or respond effectively. Modern MLRS variants continue the system's evolution. The M270 upgrade improved fire control, mobility, and reliability while maintaining compatibility with expanding rocket munition types. The high-mobility artillery rocket system, designated HIMARS, mounted 6 rocket pod on wheeled truck chassis, creating more deployable system while sacrificing some armored protection and rocket capacity. Guided multiple launch rocket system munitions, introduced in 2000s, added GPS guidance to individual rockets, transforming MLRS from area fire weapon to precision strike system capable of engaging point targets at extended range. Current operations demonstrate MLRS continuing relevance. The system remains in US Army service as of 2025, 42 years after initial deployment. MLRS and HIMARS systems deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflicts throughout the 2000s and 2010s, providing fire support that maintained effectiveness across diverse operational environments. The basic MLRS design proved sufficiently flexible to accommodate new munitions, updated fire control, and evolving tactical requirements while preserving core capabilities that made the system revolutionary in 1983. International adoption validates MLRS effectiveness and influence. More than 15 nations operate MLRS or HIMARS systems, making these platforms NATO standard artillery systems. Countries including United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, and Japan employ MLRS variants, integrating them into artillery organizations as primary long-range fire support platforms. This widespread adoption reflects recognition that MLRS capabilities represent essential components of modern artillery forces. The story of MLRS employment during Desert Storm illustrates how technological innovation in fire support creates tactical advantages that traditional systems cannot match through numerical superiority or tactical adjustments. Iraqi artillery represented capable forces by conventional standards, equipped with Soviet systems that had performed adequately throughout the Iran-Iraq War, crewed by soldiers with substantial combat experience. But capability and experience meant nothing when facing opponents who engaged from beyond Iraqi effective range, who delivered overwhelming firepower in seconds rather than minutes, who displaced before Iraqi forces could respond effectively. Iraq expected artillery duels where numerical advantages and crew experience would prove decisive. America delivered steel rain from over the horizon, engaging Iraqi positions from ranges where Iraqi forces couldn't return fire, covering entire defended areas with submunitions before Iraqi forces could take cover, and displacing before Iraqi counter-battery fire impacted empty desert. The M270 MLRS system demonstrated that modern artillery warfare rewards range, speed, and mobility more than numbers or static defensive positions. That lesson, learned by Iraqi forces through devastating experience during those 43 days in 1991, continues shaping artillery development and doctrine 34 years later. MLRS remains in service today, still delivering steel rain, still providing fire support capability that few adversaries can match and none can ignore.